Virtua Fighter 3 came to arcades in 1996. It used the Sega Model 3 arcade board, which broke new records at the time for polygon counts. Well, it wouldn't be a Virtua Fighter game if it didn't usher in new groundbreaking technology as well as breathtaking visuals. This was a first true 128-bit next-generation gaming experience, and a taste of what was to come after the 32-bit/64-bit era. Virtua Fighter 3 sits in between the older and newer Virtua Fighter games. It's considered the black sheep of the series, but it did introduce gameplay features that are now commonplace within this series. As with any kind of change, it takes time to get it right, and also to be accepted. I like to think of Virtua Fighter 3 as a game that transitioned this series into a new era that was only fully realised with Virtua Fighter 4 and 5. But the most interesting thing about Virtua Fighter 3 was its console ports. Now, if you're a Dreamcast fan, you most likely have the Dreamcast port in your game collection. But did you know there was almost a Sega Saturn port? In this exciting episode of Obscure Gaming, I'm going to talk about the unreleased port of Virtua Fighter 3 for the Sega Saturn. While it did divide fans, Virtua Fighter 3 was a success and did get an update a year later in 1997 with Virtua Fighter 3 TB. As with the two previous games in this series, a console port was expected, and Sega wasn't going to let its fans down. On the 28th of November 1996, Yu Suzuki said in a public interview that AM2 and myself would take full responsibility for this translation. Right from the beginning, this project was on dodgy ground, as the future of the Saturn was unknown. The system itself failed to gain significant market share, and with Virtua Fighter 3 going into development so late into this failed system's life, Sega must have been worried. Well, they were, because in early 1997, Sega was already hinting that this port might get cancelled, and its absence at the Sega E3 lineup in 1997 only seemed to confirm this. I think it's strange to cancel something that to all intents and purposes was finished. Wouldn't it be better just to say this game was simply not released? Well, anyway, the reason for this game's non-release was because a Dreamcast port was also in development. Sega thought releasing this game for a dying system was a bad idea, and that it also might hurt Dreamcast sales of Virtua Fighter 3. Everything up to this point I'm fairly sure is correct, as there's so much evidence online to confirm it. But what I'm about to talk about now, while I'm sure is also true, is slightly more speculation than solid facts. It is rumoured that Virtua Fighter 3 was meant to use a special 3D graphics card for the Sega Saturn. If that's true, that's very mind-blowing. The 3D card most likely plugged into the cartridge slot on top of the system, but it's also possible that it could have gone into the back expansion port that was used for the video CD cards. I'm not sure who Sega was teaming up with to create the Saturn 3D card, because at the time Sega had dealings with all the companies that create and developed 3D products and solutions. The most likely company, and the one that seems to come up all the times in the forums, is Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin co-developed the Sega Model 3 arcade board with Sega, which by the way is the hardware that powered Virtua Fighter 3 in the arcades. So it makes sense to have them develop the 3D upgrade that would allow the Saturn to play the arcade port of Virtua Fighter 3. The rumoured upgrade would have about 8MB of onboard low latency RAM, as well as some kind of graphical hardware. While this upgrade would not have given the Saturn the ability to do a perfect port of Virtua Fighter 3, it would however allow the Saturn to do a comparable scaled down port. According to some sources, Two versions of Virtua Fighter 3 were made for the Saturn, one that did in fact use the 3D cards, and another version that just used the stock Saturn hardware. If this is true, it would make sense to develop two versions so all Saturn owners could play this game whether or not they had the 3D upgrade installed. According to other sources, the 3D upgrade card wasn't even used in the end, so the 3D card might have just been a piece of hardware that Sega prototyped, but never actually planned to use. If that was the case, then how could this game run on a Saturn? Well, there are three possible reasons why. The first possible reason is the version of Virtua Fighter 3 that did end up being finished was the non-3D upgrade version. The second possible reason is that Virtua Fighter might have been developed to make use of the 4MB RAM expansion card, but I highly doubt it. The third and most likely possibility was that Sega had created late into the Saturn's life new development kits that could finally utilise the hardware to its maximum potential, and this I believe is the most likely reason why this game could run on a stock Saturn without any additional hardware. SDK2, Sega Development Kit 2, was the last development kit ever made for the Saturn. Virtua Fighter 3 for the Saturn used this kit in its development, and the results are stunning. The first version of Virtua Fighter 3 for the Saturn maxed out at 500,000 polygons, and version 2 tops out at 700,000 polygons. Apparently both these versions run at a solid 30 frames a second. The SDK2 doubles the performance of a stock Saturn, and the tech demos showcasing games developed with this SDK2 were apparently more visually superior to anything ever released on the PlayStation. If that's true, all I can say is imagine what would have happened to the Saturn had Sega provided these SDKs to third-party developers from the start of the system's life. So that's the story of Virtua Fighter 3 for the Sega Saturn. I hope this version of Virtua Fighter 3 does get leaked onto the internet one day, as well as more details about that 3D card. What makes the story about this unreleased game even more sadder was, this is the true home port of Virtua Fighter 3 developed under Yu Suzuki that we never got. I know we did get a port for the Dreamcast, but that version was rushed and not even ported by AM2, it was in fact outsourced to Genki. To make matters worse, the Dreamcast port had to go against Soul Calibur, and we all know how that went. Well, that wraps up the first episode of Obscure Gaming. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.